Let us look at how the new Inec chairman exposed the former Inec chairman. Record that during the 2023 presidential election, Inec gave excuse of network glitch. And this after they have promised in their guideline to transmit election results electronically. But just listen to the new Inec chairman, his own view pertaining to the failure of Irev. We'll come back to further this conversation.
The purpose of introducing Beavers and Irev was to ensure the integrity of the election. And that is the purpose of technology all over the world. I believe what happened in 2023, which was subsumed as a glitch, before we went into the election, my own understanding and based on the review of the decisions of Supreme Court, we found that there was no clarity as to the purpose of Beavers of Irev. Not until the Supreme Court came out to say that Irev was not an electronic collation system. And that position was not properly brought out before the election. The Inec was supposed to be a safeguard for comparison, because the laws made by this distinguished Senate did not do away with manual collation. However, Irev was supposed to provide some guarantees and checks and balances. But owing to the issues of glitches, which in simple time, I understand as improper configuration, especially during the presidential election, that eroded the confidence of so many people. So, as His Excellency the Senate President said, I have to audit the system if I'm given the opportunity to see what is actually wrong and whether we have what it takes as it is now. Because it is not just the INEC responsibility alone. You have the other agencies like NCC, NIMC, and the service providers that will have to work together to ensure that we give Nigerians a technology that everybody will be happy about. And I want to believe that the question of the minority leadership is also similar to that. There would definitely be an audit of what the system we are meeting, and especially of the logistic of the election itself, and ensure that the proper strategy is put in place. We all know the problem. So we'll find a proper strategy to be able to confront those problems headlong. I give one example. Logistic problem. We rely on third-party logistics to transport sensitive election materials. Some of the vehicles, when you see them, they are old. And they don't even go far. And when they drop the materials, they don't even remain to bring back. So when they abandon the voting and the results, and collation is made or to transport, you now have to be hiring machines and so. So we need to take it serious and ensure, even if INEC has to go into some form of logistic on its own to ensure that that aspect. I'm just giving one example that I know. Thank you, sir.
So you can clearly see that in the explanation of the new INEC chairman, that it was improper configuration, meaning the INEC as an institution did not do a proper job. Because if they fail to do a proper job, if they fail to do a proper configuration, and at the end of the day, the system failed, it means they failed Nigerians. And I understand that currently, the National Assembly, the joint section of National Assembly, talking about the Senate and House of Rep, are making move to amend the Electoral Act again. And we have a situation where they are now proposing to make electronic transfer of results compulsory. Because during that last election, it was a liberty that Inec parade. Inec had the discretion to determine how to transmit election results. But it appears as though the National Assembly now want to make it compulsory that you must transmit election results electronically. And I think for me is the way to go. But it's another thing to say whether if they have the courage to do that, whether the president will want to assent to it, or whether the president will decide to withhold his assent. And if it does that, we understand that the National Assembly have overriding power going by the Constitution if the president decides to withhold assent or decline assent. But we have seen in the past when, or rather where a sitting president will decline assent and the National Assembly decide to override him, and it turned out that the sitting president go to court, or rather went to court, and the case was pending in court until the expiration of his tenure. So all the whole essence of giving the National Assembly the power by the Constitution to override the president was not achieved, hence the case was in court. But I must say that, however I look at it, for us to have a free, fair and credible election in 2027, there's every need to review the Electoral Acts. That is true. And not just in that area, there are so many areas that need attention. Because for me, if you look at even the process of litigation that the National Assembly is trying to tinker with, saying that they must ensure that all issues that have to do with litigation is dealt with before the proper inauguration of who won the election. I think it's the way to go if you ask me, but the question here is the time they are proposing to allow for litigation for me is grossly inadequate. And they said that the Constitution before now makes it 180 days for litigants to conclude their cases in court, or rather for the court to dispense all the cases. But from what we are seeing in their proposed amendment, it appears as though they want to even reduce it to 90 days. And saying that the 90 days is grossly inadequate, because for me, if you are asking someone to prove his case, and the person is alleging that there is irregularity in the voting, or that the vote does not, the result that was declared does not reflect with what actually transpired at the poll. I want to say that the time for the petitioner to start calling for a recount, that duration they want to allow for litigation is grossly inadequate. And that should have to do with the burden of proof that is currently on the petitioner. I'm of the view that the petitioner should no longer parade or shoulder that responsibility. Let that responsibility be put on Inec, the umpire. Because we have seen in so many instances in the past where, of course, after an election, where a petitioner will be complaining that he doesn't have access to some level of electoral materials needed to prosecute his or her case. But if Inec carries the burden of proof, hence they are in custody of all the electoral material used for the election, it will no longer be a challenge looking for documents to prosecute the case. And another issue has to do with if Inec has the burden of proof to prove that the election actually substantially comply with the Electoral Acts. That way, I want to believe that they will be more responsible, because they know that definitely they will be one that will go to court to defend the result of the election they declare. Not after conducting the election, declaring the election result, somebody who did not conduct it is the one that want to go and prove that the election was rigged or not. So I'm of the view that in the amendment, let Inec carry the burden of proof. That's on one hand. Then let us equally look at the issue of independent candidacy. But I want to say that the major political parties, as we have it, like PDP, APC, Labour Party, and now ADC, their expression of inform, interest form and nomination form is always expensive. So that if you don't have deep pockets, you may not be able to afford it. I have in some instances where you have a popular candidate in a jurisdiction, in his constituency, who may not have such deep pockets. So I want to say that if you allow individual candidacy, it doesn't matter whether you have deep pockets. You can test your popularity at the pool. I think it's the way to go. As you go forward into tinkering with the amendment of the Electoral Act. But I want to say that if we go into the next round of election with this same Electoral Act that is susceptible to manipulation, I want to say that we are likely going to come back to start singing the same song we sang in 2023, or rather after 2023 presidential election. Because I want to believe that all Nigerian politicians is the same thing. Any lacuna, any loophole in the Electoral Act, they will always take advantage of it. So the best way is to reduce some level of human interference. And the best approach to do that is to introduce this electronic transfer of results. So that once voting is concluded at the level of polling units, result enter into form 88A. Of course, it will be snapped with beavers sent to Irev, where all stakeholders, including political parties, election observers, both locally and internationally, civil liberty organizations, of course, every interested person, even at individual basis, can have access to the Irev, look at the result as it's coming in, even have your own situation room, collect your own results, and definitely it will tally with that of Inec because it's from the same source. I must say for me, that's the way to go, because we have seen election in some other part of the world where losers will not necessarily contest the results. And the only thing that made the losers not to contest the result is they will be satisfied that if they go to court, it will be a waste of time and a waste of resources. Having seen that the system perhaps is transparent, and of course, they will not even have evidence to even say they want to prosecute their case. Though the new Inec chairman have said that he is hoping to conduct election where the loser will congratulate the winner. I hope to see that happen, because for me, it's the way to go. And the only way that can happen is if election results turn out, if election process turn out to be free, fair, and credible. Another major issue has to do with how do we prosecute offenders of the law during election. Because in the elections, we have seen so many different alleged crime, from voter suppression to ballot snatching, ballot stuffing, and all of that. And all of this leads to voter apathy. So the only way you can address voter apathy, for instance, is if you go into prosecuting those who are found wanted, who are arrested for various crimes during the election. But if all we see is those who are accused of crime during the election getting a slap on the wrist and asking to go, I want to say that it is not going to deter other people from committing electoral related crimes. The only thing that will deter them is when they see those who commit it under prosecution. Because the whole essence of law and order, the whole essence of prosecuting offenders of the law is to act as deterrent to others. But if those who commit crime, or who are perceived to have committed crime, who are suspected to have committed crime, who are alleged to have committed crime, if all they do is go get a slap on the wrist and ask to go, I want to say that definitely in the next round of election, we are going to see more people committing similar crime. But let me say very big time for time. This is Satla Media and I'm Mr. Matt.